Hello and welcome to Why Medics Matter, a podcast for doctors by doctors, brought to you by Doctors Training. My name's Dr. Simon Fraser, and I have the pleasure of being joined today by Dr. Toni Brunin, who's a colleague of mine, who's going to talk about boundaries. Toni, welcome. Would you like to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Toni Brunin. I'm a consultant anaesthetist in the West Midlands, working in Worcestershire. I also have other roles in education. I'm the Vice President for Education, Training and Exams at the Royal College of Anaesthetists. And I do some workshops and some partnership and quality assurance for doctors training.
Thank you. It might seem like an obvious question, but why do boundaries matter for doctors working in NHS?
I think it's a historical thing. So clearly, in times gone by, there was a clear differentiation between your work and your home life because they were two separate locations and there wasn't any digital systems or anything linking or blurring the two. So you were kind of at work, but you're at home. With the advent of technology and all of the advances that we've seen with various digital tools, emails, WhatsApps, clinical management systems, being able to access your hospital systems on your home, iPad, laptop, whatever, it's blurred those boundaries. And I think one of the things that the NHS haven't been particularly good at is to try and define those boundaries and to try and write policies to protect its workforce from that blurring of that work-life balance.
Okay. So I'm hoping you're going to give us a few. I know it's something that you're very passionate about. I remember meeting you on one of our workshops, and I think we sort of recognised your talent then. And remember you talking about your phones, and you have a bit of a policy in your house about phones and the family, and you sort of you just lock them away.
Yeah, and we still do. We have a little drawer in our house. So I have an iPad which I use for my work emails. And if I have it on the side, even though I'm not at work, I sort of compulsively look at it. And so I have to put it physically away out of sight in a drawer so that I don't think about it. And then as the children they became teenagers and started getting their own mobile phones, that sort of policy, I guess, went into them too. And so particularly when they were kind of young teenagers and they were first getting their mobile phones, of an evening we all put our phones in these drawers. They weren't allowed their phones in their bedrooms. They weren't allowed to charge their phones in their bedrooms. And my husband and I did the same. But actually I think it's a really good thing to instill in the younger generation and to demonstrate yourself, because digital boundaries are so important, because if you don't put them in, no one's going to put them in for you. And before you know it, you are constantly available for work. Your kind of home life and your work life are blurred. And you can't mitigate those emails or those sort of slightly gritty questions that you get into your inbox. If you're looking at those at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, you can't not see them. So once you've seen that complaint or that coroner's request or whatever it is to do with your clinical job, you can't switch off. And then it impacts the rest of your life in terms of your ability to sleep and relax and spend time with your family. And so really the onus is on the individual to put those boundaries in place. And for us, it's a physical boundary, it's a drawer. But I think, your phones particularly, I took my emails off my phone about 10 years ago. I turned my phone into black and white. And at the time, the children were like, why are your phone in black and white? But now I gather amongst the children, it's quite popular to have a grayscale phone. There's lots of influencers on Instagram and various places sort of advocating this. So I feel like I've been a bit of a pioneer accidentally with this.
What's a grayscale? Tell me a bit more about that.
So the reason behind it is that so Apple and Android and all of those companies basically did a study into how you could get the maximum dopamine release by clearing a notification, and they tried out lots of different sort of shapes, sizes, color combinations, and they reached upon that sweet spot that we all recognize, which is a red circle with a white letter or number inside for your notifications. And so we're all being trained by these tech companies to be constantly trying to clear those notifications. So yeah, definitely turn your notifications off of your phone if you can, because you are being trained by the tech companies to clear them. But also one thing you can do to get around that is to put it into black and white. So my phone there's a filter on all phones as part of an accessibility feature where you can have it as grayscale. So my phone is in black and white. So I don't get any of that dopamine hit by clearing my emails or my messages or notifications on other apps, which has become a very popular thing amongst teenagers today.
So what you've talked about there, Shen, one of your particular strategies about stuff. When you and I do workshops, and when we ask people, one of the favorite things I do in the audience, I say, put your hand up in the room if you have your work emails on your phone, accessible in the evening. Put your hand up, and then I say, keep your hand up if you've had an email at maybe 9, 10 o'clock that's really triggered you, put you in a bad mood, stopped you sleeping, impacted in your life. And a lot, I'd say 80% of them keep their hand up. And then I say to them, keep your hand up if you think you're that important. And everyone's hands just drop. And there's that reality. And we often talk about it. And I think it's the FOMO, isn't it? Fear of missing out, or you've been trained by the tech.
Yeah, and I think also there is, and this is where I think, NHS departments could be better. I think we used to write letters to each other, and there was a natural pause between writing a letter, putting it in the post, it being delivered to the recipient, being read, and the correspondence. There was a natural delay. And with email, obviously, you can reply instantly. And I think people's expectations they feel to be a good clinician, to be a good doctor, I'm judged on how quickly I reply to emails. And we all know every department has that person who just seems not to reply to any emails you send them. And I'm not advocating
Yeah.
that because I think that's really frustrating. And I think as part of our roles as professionals, we do have an obligation to correspond using emails. But I don't think that extends to being immediately responsive and being able to reply within 5 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour even. And it certainly doesn't extend to being out of kind of office hours. I think although the NHS is clearly a 24-hour institution, we have on-call systems and we have a prioritization of emergencies and kind of more elective and mundane work. And yet in our digital communications, I don't think we have that boundary. And so we're very happy to accept that there are certain things that are an emergency, but in email, we seem to feel that we have to respond as if everything is life or death. And actually, I think one of the things that departments could do is maybe set some expectations about, yes, it's not okay to completely ignore your emails. And if you go away for a few days or a week, you should put an out of office on to let people know not to expect a reply. But sometimes you reply to colleagues, reasonably instantaneously, and then they reply, and then you think, actually, I don't think we all should be this responsive. I just think, and it's that drive, and then you use it as a metric of success where you think, because I know I certainly fell into this. I mean, I'm a reformed, digital boundary advocate because I used to judge my success by how quickly I could reply to emails, and certainly I was a college tutor for a bit, and I remember vividly going on holiday. And it was around the time that we had changeover of doctors, and I felt that my responsibility, my obligation as the college tutor was to be available on email for all of those doctors that were joining our department and anyone that was leaving that needed things signed off. So I sort of badly timed my family holiday, but I swore blind I could not, put an out of office on. And so every day the children would be like, "Why are you on your iPad? Why are you doing work? You're on holiday." And I was sort of saying, "Well, because you've got these new doctors and everything, and I need to reply to them." And anyway, long story short, the following year, my second year in the college tutor role, I put an out of office on, and you know what? Life went on. Nothing happened. I delegated appropriately, and I actually had a good break. And I think sometimes we can feel this real obligation because you care so much about the doctors in training, whatever departmental role you have, where you feel that you have to contribute 24/7. But the real spoiler alert is life absolutely goes on. If you have a couple of weeks off and you let people know in email who they can contact and that when you'll be back, nothing bad happens. But I think we get that FOMO.
Absolutely. One of the things I often used to do or say to people is have two phones. And a bit like you on the holidays, I was a bit of a workaholic, but I was always good at putting boundaries on holidays. And I have my work phone, I'd give it to my wife, Elaine, and she'd have to hide it from me. I could probably find it if I really wanted to, but that effort of having to go, it'd be like your drawer, I've actually I'll just have a little sneaky look. And people are so terrified about missing something. the impact. One of the other things I think you talked about in the old, and if we look at different generations, we know there's a generation that would use letters with communication. I'm a generation that's used a lot of email. The current generations coming through use a lot of WhatsApp, and actually the very latest Zoomers are instant messaging.
I was going to say, I think I'd challenge you on the latest generation being WhatsApp, because as somebody who's got two
They're
teenagers
not
in her house, they only use WhatsApp to communicate with, and I quote, the old people, e.g., my husband and I, their grandparents. Their main method of communication between each other is largely on Snapchat, actually, which is
Snapchat.
instant, and also that protection of it being deleted. So you kind of don't have that somebody storing up years worth of correspondence between you. So yeah, but it is fascinating how in generations it does change.
So, what's your feelings on staff WhatsApp groups?
Well, I think I've got a slightly cantankerous reputation amongst both my clinical department in the NHS and also amongst my colleagues who I work with at the College of Anaesthetists, because I am really against WhatsApp groups. I think WhatsApp is a tool to send pictures of your dog's children holiday to your family members. I don't think there's any role for WhatsApp in any kind of professional business arena. And I know, for example, in other industries, so in accountancy and banking, there's just a blanket rule on any kind of WhatsApp group amongst your workplace. Whereas in the NHS, we have many WhatsApp groups, of which some are, pictures of, I've made my son a birthday cake, what do you think? This is a picture of my children on the beach or whatever. And some are like clinically related. And it just makes me feel worried, because I think we have processes in place for all of these organizations where decisions are made in informal meetings that are usually minuted. You have a record of decisions that are made. And in parallel, you have loads of things going on in the departmental WhatsApp group, which is not minuted and there's no record of it. And I worry that in the future, we're going to end up in a problem where people are saying, well, when was that decided? And, oh, well, that was on the family or the, departmental WhatsApp. And, my husband and I run some wellness courses, and we were doing one a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about just this issue. And one of the doctors on our group said, well, we have a physician's WhatsApp group in my trust, and he's a gastroenterologist. And sometimes he'll get a message that will say, we just need a gastro opinion in bed 2 of AMU, please. And he's got some quite boundaries about WhatsApp, similar to myself, and he just doesn't respond. And then sometimes he gets reported for not replying to the WhatsApp group. And he keeps saying, well, show me the policy where our trust has decided that patient referrals now go through WhatsApp. That is bonkers. And not least that, you want to make sure that there's a record of these things, be it in the patient's notes or in any kind of decision making. And WhatsApp just doesn't provide that. And I think we have all been kind of lulled into a sense of security because we're so familiar with WhatsApp as a personal tool. And I'm not down on WhatsApp, it's fine, and other, messaging apps. But I think the fact that we've let it into our business and professional lives is the mistake. And I think we as doctors would be better for our own well-being to not engage in those groups. And I think as a sort of policy maker, I just think it's a real hazard that we haven't yet explored.
Absolutely. One of the thing I was working with a pediatric department recently on a timeout, and they've got a complicated rota with people on different tiers amongst the consultant group. We've got some people who have retired but are not on call now, and they have this department WhatsApp group. And I think, like many people listening today, is that constant ping: who can help out? So-and-so's not turned up for work tonight. We're short for next weekend. And there was a range of emotions from a few people who were not on the road to feeling incredibly guilty. Others feeling that it wasn't always fairly shared. And that real sense of duty, that if there's a gap, I, as a consultant, regardless where the gap was on which tier, I have to come in. And it just feels like a constant cycle. I don't know what your thoughts or solutions are.
Yeah, I think if you think it's a real problem, I think if you are going to have a work WhatsApp group, you should try and sort of police the boundaries within that and have a curfew. So you say, well, don't post before 8 a.m. and don't post after 6 p.m. If you're going to use a WhatsApp group in that emergency, we need extra cover or we need an extra list or something, almost you need a dedicated WhatsApp group for that. That has no other noise on it. So it's not pictures of your colleagues' children, dogs, pets, whatever. It's only for that purpose. And actually, in that situation, the broadcast function where somebody can put a message out, but there's not the chatter is disabled, is probably the way to do it. And I think there's lots of things you can do by which you can mute it, you can archive it, you can put it into your locked chats, but we all suffer from that FOMO. And so when you see a WhatsApp chat that you're not really engaged in, that's got 200 messages in it, it takes quite a lot of willpower to not go, oh God, what's gone down at work? I better have a look at that. And actually, you're better to just not engage in the first place. And we certainly, in my department, we saw this during COVID. There was a lot of, emergency planning. In anesthesia, things were changing quite quickly, different guidance. And so I think even somebody who hates WhatsApp recognized the role that it played during the pandemic. But the moment we were back onto normal rotas and the pandemic was quote unquote over, I remember saying to my boss, please, can I leave now? Because we had one for social, one for ICU, one for short notice cover. And I said, I'm a bit overwhelmed with WhatsApp groups. And also I just don't want to be, I just want to be able to switch off at the end of the day. It's been stressful enough. And actually, to be fair, my boss was like, yes, there's nothing that you need to be in, so you can leave all of them. So I did. And then one of my colleagues said to me afterwards, he said, you left all the WhatsApp groups. And I said, yeah, because I was finding them a bit overwhelming. He's like, isn't that rude? And I was like, no, I don't think so. I personally think if you leave a WhatsApp group that you didn't want to be part of in the first place, maybe I've got no insight at all, but I don't think that is rude. And he was like, oh, but won't you miss out on all the conversation? And I said, well, maybe, but you know what? I think whilst I'm missing out, I'll be enjoying really quality time with my children, my dogs, my family. Actually, I don't know what I'm missing out on. And as it's happened, a couple
Yeah.
of the groups have stayed, and I still now get screenshots from a couple of my colleagues who know. So if there's anything that's really interesting or that they think is particularly relevant to me, I've got these couple of moles who'll send me some screenshots from it, which I actually think is the best of all worlds. Because if there's anything really exciting going on, I still get to hear about it. But yeah, I think in general we perhaps have allowed this sort of personal tool to really overwhelm us in our work lives and our professional lives. I think we should all think about what groups we're in and what purpose they're serving and what the boundaries or rules are within that group.
And just thinking away from the digital and boundaries and homework, and what are your thoughts about how we make that transition?
I think having a purposeful transition is important. I consider myself lucky that I have a small commute. So where I live is about half an hour away from where I work. And I really value that because it allows me to sort of shut the door on my chaotic home life and have half an hour of transition. I like to listen to podcasts, at the radio, whatever, but it's time, just me, to kind of leave that behind me. And I think it allows me to turn up to work as a sort of better self than if I just immediately left my house and was immediately at work. And similarly, at the end of the day, I can kind of reflect on my day, and I've got that half an hour transition between leaving my clinical work and the work stresses. I can mull them over, think about them. And when I then open my front door and I arrive back into my family life, I kind of can be a better person because I'm not carrying all of that burden on my shoulders. And I think even if you don't have a commute to do, purposefully switching off your home person as you go to work and vice versa at the end of the day, I think is a really valuable thing to do because it allows you to be the person you want to be in both settings. And sometimes we are different at work than we are at home.
So can I be can I be controversial?
Sure.
There'll be a few people listening and going, "Oh, that's all great for you. You've got a job where you can do that." But actually, I'm 2 of 5 oncologists, and I've got all these patients to look after who feel a huge sense of duty and commitment. What are the risks for that, and any advice we can share?
I think firstly, I recognise that we're in a pretty privileged position in anaesthetics actually because we kind of do sessional work. But I still think that to be the best doctor you can be for your patients, you do need time to recharge and to look after yourself. And you don't want to, I think you don't want to be that person who gives all to their work and then is not the person they want to be for their family. And I think that balance is really important. No matter how frequent your on call is, how specialist your area of medicine is, you're only going to be able to give the best for your patients if you are well in yourself and you're recharged. And I think there's a risk if you don't allow a boundary and you don't switch off from work, that you end up being at work completely drained of energy, coming home and being completely drained of energy, and then not being able to be the person you want to be for your husband, wife, family, whoever, in your personal setting, you're also not firing at your best. And actually, at some point, life is going to intervene because you can't run on empty for too long before, we know that burnout is a problem with doctors. We know that it's a stressful profession. And I think the boundary helps you to really separate your home and your work life. And in your home life, and ultimately, as much as we are all dedicated to our job as doctors, the NHS pays us for a certain number of hours per week. We've never signed up for a 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 job. And the time that you're at home, either when you're on leave, so the importance of, actually taking your leave and not being at work, but also out of hours when you're not working, doing things that regenerate you and charge your batteries is so important for your own well-being and thus better for your patients and patient safety.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was running a session recently with a senior clinical lead who's a gynecologist, and we do this mental fitness score where all the different things about boundaries, how you organize your time, sleep, and everything. She scored really high. And often people who score high have been on the other side of burnout. Yeah, and we talked about that. I said, you almost have to get into a bit of a mess before you really start looking after yourself. And one of the things that people often feel is it being selfish. If I look after myself and put myself first, it's selfish. And she gave me a really useful lens. She said, as a clinical director, if people don't look after themselves, set boundaries, recover, recharge, that's selfish. He said, because actually what happens, they stay at work, their productivity drops, they work longer, and then they go off sick for 3 or 4 months. And actually then the service has to pick up those gaps. So there's something about the narrative that we wear this extra hours being always available, almost like it's a badge of honor. What can we learn from the generation coming through that people would often criticize for having boundaries?
Yeah, I think on the whole, you can always learn, like side with the young, because the new ideas are what are going to kind of propagate. And I think they are better at boundaries than we've ever been, but partly because they've grown up in a digital environment in which they've had to, I remember going to school and having my friends at school and switching off it when I got home because there was no real way to contact them unless I wanted to sit in the hall phone and, ring their landline. That was it. And so I think the generation who are entering the workplace now and the generation below them have had to have some boundaries. And I think you can learn a lot from them, actually, because as you say, we have a problem and a culture in the NHS of presenteeism by which even though you know that you're not at your best, you're not performing your best, you feel obliged to attend. And whilst that's honourable, you're actually doing your colleagues and your patients no favours, because if you're not fit to work, the best thing you can do is not be at work and actually address the problems, because otherwise you have higher incidences of errors and adverse patient outcomes. And that then spirals because then you're not at your best and you're dealing with problems, complaints, adverse incidents, all which add to your stress and adversely affect your well-being in the workplace. And so although it feels a bit counterintuitive, and I know there's a sort of narrative from certain generations that self-care is selfish, I think as you said it, the looking after yourself is the best thing you can do for your patients. And it's also that role modeling, isn't it? I think, how can we tell our patients, look after yourselves, be if we're also not doing the same?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So if we have a doctor listening today who knows that boundaries are being routinely crossed, what's the first small steps you encourage them to take?
I think 3 steps. Firstly, identify the need for a boundary, which it sounds like they've done. If you feel like you're kind of unfulfilled and that there's something that's really jarring with you, then set the boundary. And you don't have to be, rude, but you can be sort of clear and assertive and kind. Just saying, actually, I won't be responding to emails at 8 o'clock in the evening because that's my family time. But then the onus is really on the individual to hold that boundary, because as you know, you can't control other people. And so it's really for you to then, once you've decided you need one and you've set it, the hard work is for the individual to then police that boundary, because you will continue to find people encroaching on that boundary. And actually, the more you gently push back and you say thank you but no, and I have this going back to WhatsApp. Sometimes people will add me to a WhatsApp group and then I'll leave it again, and then they'll say to me, why do you keep leaving my WhatsApp group? And I say, well, thank you for inviting me to, but actually I have the thing by which I don't use WhatsApp for any professional roles. And then the sort of penny drops and they go, okay, fine, and then they stop adding me. But it's really for me to police that. And I think, yeah, it's down to the individual to actually police that boundary.
Thank you. So as we come to the end, there's always there's a question I ask all of our guests, which is, given all your experience and wisdom, if you could have all of that and go back and speak to the 23-year-old version of yourself, starting off as a new doctor, what advice would you give yourself?
I think probably 2 bits of advice, which is probably adding to your question. But the first is that you're allowed to say no. I think it took me a long time to realize that not every request, opportunity, favor needs me to say yes, and that actually saying no isn't selfish. If I can't dedicate the time to it and I can't do a good job, it's better to say no at the outset than to take it on and then do an unsatisfactory job. And actually, it allows you to then focus on saying yes to the things that energize you, interest you, and then work becomes a hobby because actually you're doing things that you enjoy. So that would be my first one. And I think the second one is that I fell into the trap, as I know many doctors do, in which sort of that desire to please, be a people pleaser, is so, and like the way we're selected for medical school and the way you just feel this need to be that kind of yes person and to please people. And actually, people pleasing, does not bring you any peace. And actually, it's impossible. There is no world in which you can please everyone, and it's really exhausting trying. And so once you the penny drops on that and you stop trying to please everyone, and instead you start to think, well, what do I think? What are my values? And what do I think the right thing is? Actually, the more harmonious your work and life is, because you're doing what you think is authentically right for you rather than what you think is going to please somebody else who, for the record, will never be pleased.
I love that. Well, you've certainly pleased me. You've given us a huge insight. Be careful about what time I send you messages. No, in a serious note, we've had this chat and I've learned a lot about this. And I think if I take one thing away, it's about once you set them, you have to own them. You can't change other people's behavior. So, Toni, thank you very much for joining us on Why Medics Matter, and look forward to catching up again soon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.